Good evening, everyone, and welcome to New York Buddha Dharma. We're working our way through Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism by Chögyam Trungpa, and we are on the chapter called The Hard Way. He's still really talking about the relationship between the teacher and the student and the necessary meeting between teacher and student and what that entails. An opening of minds and a presentation by the student of him or herself as they really are. Not as we would like to present ourselves as being some kind of idealized state. Can everyone hear? Above the air conditioner? So, it's not a question of creating some kind of magical situation, but it's openness, a mutual creation between two people, the teacher and the student. And of course it can involve more than just the teacher and the student. But it's an opening to the world as it truly is, including oneself as one truly is, rather than as one would like or hope to be. This was particularly easy to see at the time that he was giving these talks in 1970, because the countercultural revolution was in full swing, and there were many gurus abroad, and it was all very new. And the people who were coming to his talks largely, who were young, in their teens or 20s, were looking for alternatives, alternative ways to be. And people were experimenting with all sorts of things. With yoga, with different kinds of spirituality, with diet, macrobiotics. Remember macrobiotics? And Michio Kushi was the fellow who invented macrobiotics. And my brother, who was a stone-cold hippie in those days, used to call him Mushi Kushi. And he called the food macromush. We all tried doing that. I mean, I was macrobiotic for a while. And I think I achieved the thinnest I'd ever been in my adult life. And we were just trying all these different trips. So it was very easy to understand what Trungpa Rinpoche was saying when he said he wanted us all to give up these trips. He used to say, please don't go on any trips. He sort of begged us. Or conversely, I remember him getting on an airplane once. I and some other people took him to the airport, and as he started down the gangway, to the plane, he turned around and waved at us all and said, "Have a nice trip." Because everybody was using that expression, tripping. And the drugs were in full swing, and psychedelics, marijuana, all of that. And people were trying to form a counterculture, a new way to live. He gave a seminar on American karma, he called it. And the thing that I most remember from that seminar was him looking out at all of us and saying, You're all trying to find a way out. But it's not a matter of finding the way out. It's a matter of finding the way in. And in the next few years, he got people completely turned around, had people start getting back into business, getting married, having babies, wearing suits and ties at programs. We had balls. We had a ball every year where people dressed up in formal or semi-formal dress and learned how to waltz. If you can believe. I mean, a lot of these people were just, stone cold hippies is when they first showed up. And suddenly everyone was in business. And I remember one fellow came and he was in the oil business, and Rinpoche would say, "We can work together." That was his kind of his bird song. We can work together, whatever it was. And he would encourage people to do things. There was a group of people who got into the gem business of selling gems, wholesale and retail. It was called Triple Gem. And they brought in quite a few people got into that business. When I was in business and all kinds of things. My friend David started the Boulder Bookstore. He's still doing it. Last year it was voted by the American Booksellers Association the best bookstore in the United States. Isn't that amazing? So it takes a lot of work to go into your American karma. And really what it amounts to is being willing, especially with the spiritual friend, to unmask and to be just who you are. We're so used to wearing masks, especially we'd apply for college and we'd have on our college mask, and we'd apply for a job and you have on your job mask, and you meet some new people and you have on your interpersonal social mask, and who you are and how you dress and the kind of things you say, especially when you're a teenager and coming out of that whole thing. And with the teacher, it's really a matter of unmasking. And there's no trick to it. There's no magic. There's no technique. If you try and force it, then it becomes another forced, unnatural ism. It just takes place very naturally in the relationship with the teacher, because the teacher is so open, so completely open and ready for anything, ready for whatever you've got. And I think I quoted him last year. Everybody was so willing to bend themselves into one shape or another. He said, if I told you to stand on your head 24 hours a day, you would do it. And then people were coming and they were trying to practice austerities. And, my friend Jim of the Pygmies, he had read about Dumo. Did I tell you about this last week? Dumo? I don't think so. Dumo is one of the 6 yogas of Naropa. It's the first and key one in Mahamudra. It's called the inner heat. And you generate heat in your body. It's a yogic practice. And Rinpoche. And the test for whether or not a person has accomplished Dumo, the classic example is that if you were a monk and you were doing this, is that in the middle of winter, they might be wrapped in a wet monk's robe, and then you had to walk around the monastery in the cold until you dried it out by generating inner heat. So I had this friend, and he was one of the pygmies, and he was living in a teepee, and he decided he was going to practice Dumo. And he told all the other pygmies that he had accomplished Dumo. So they said, well, then you're ready for the test. And they wrapped him in a wet sheet in the middle of Colorado winter, and had him walk around the house a bunch of times. He got very sick. We're all ready to try all these things. The real trick that we have to open ourselves. This is something we have to do in life. Giving up hope of a better way to be and hope of getting something that we imagine is going to make our lives better. And instead, working with our lives as they are, in a creative way, in a way that is a proper way, responding to the demands that we are made on us as human beings, demands to be decent people, to be helpful, to be participatory, to be kind, to be present and on the spot. This is the real hard way. Giving up the dreams, the hopes. And this is a constant struggle, really, for people on the path, to come back to this present moment as it is and work with it in a creative fashion, devoid of hope and fear. A lot of people were coming and they adopted one spiritual trip or another. A lot of people were into organic foods. There was the Green Mountain Granary in Boulder. It's gone now. It was selling organic food. A lot of people went there and purifying their bodies. And they come across this guru sitting there drinking scotch and smoking Marlboros. He says, we must really surrender, give something in a very painful way. It's our ego. This process of dismantling, undoing, opening, giving up is the real learning process. Most likely we have not managed to give up anything at all. We have only collected, built, adding layer upon layer. The problem is that we want an easy and painless answer. That's not happening. We create the situation that makes it so painful. He says we have committed ourselves to the pain of exposing ourselves, of taking off our clothes, our skin, nerves, heart, brains, until we are exposed to the universe. Nothing will be left. It will be terrible, excruciating, but that's the way it is. And then he talks about how the guru is a doctor who is going to administer an operation without anesthetics, plural. This is the way he used to say that all the time, with great glee. The operation without anesthetics. He says, have we ever unmasked giving something completely, properly, giving everything? Have we ever unmasked stripping out of our suit of armor and out of our shirt, skin, flesh, veins, right down to the heart? We must really surrender, give something up in a very painful way. We must begin to dismantle the basic structure of this ego we have managed to create. It will be difficult. Giving up ground, reference points, progress. Now when we practice meditation, it's very easy to spot your ego. I mean, when you're just simply aware, 100% aware, there is no ego. Ego's silent. There's no room for it if you're 100% present. And then that little voice comes in. What's for dinner? How am I doing? Is this boring? Am I sleepy? Am I getting anything out of this? And then you see it. That's the voice of ego. And you let it go. That voice of ego that makes plans for the future, for insecurity, for those things you can't do without, that you hope you will have, that you fear that you won't have, the things that you don't want, that you fear you will have. Q&A in this chapter was interesting. Somebody asked, can you do this alone? And the answer is no. You need a spiritual friend, someone to watch you do it, stripped down. And the reason is that the spiritual friend shows you the awakened state of mind, which is the most stripped down there is. Then there's no watcher at all. And in fact, one can recognize this very simply if one can open and be there with a spiritual friend. And the fact is, the spiritual friend shows it to you, and you have the feeling that they've given you, the student has been given a gift. But the fact of the matter is that they're both doing it simultaneously. Opening in that way, sharing that same space of openness, of reality, of simplicity, of clarity, without the intrusion of I and other, should and shouldn't, hope and fear, good and bad judgments. This open space of clarity. So it really belongs to no one. It's a mutual creation between the teacher and the student. In his first book ever in the West, Meditation in Action, he talked about this transmission. You can see it in one of the chapters. And he said that the student nonetheless feels great gratitude, even towards the teacher, even though the teacher hasn't really given them anything. They didn't hand them something. It's a mutual sharing. And he said, but that gratitude is useful. It's a great slayer of ego. So it's okay. And he says, you need someone to watch you do it. A person says, I don't see why performing austerities and mastering discipline is not the real hard way. Sit on a bed of nails, whatever. Mastering discipline, like learning Dharma. And Rinpoche says, you can deceive yourself. It is like being in a heroic play. The soft way is very much involved with the experience of heroism, while the hard way is much more personal and more difficult. The heroic way is worse than a waste of time. Worse than a waste of time to be heroic, because you're adding layers to your personality, to your suit of armor. Layers to your mask by collecting credentials. Later, to your surprise, you learn that something else is needed. One must remove the layers, the skins, which can be very painful. See, so what happens is in some of the lingo, even though I'm talking about this as being sort of a mutual and joint creation, they say that what happens is, to the student, that they internalize the guru. That means that they learn how to do what the guru showed them, that state of mind, to come back to it, all by themselves. They've brought the guru into themselves. And sometimes for a person who has internalized the guru, a picture or just remembering the guru's name can conjure up the transmission of openness, of waking up. This, in fact, is called Guru Yoga. That act of remembering the transmission that took place between the guru and the student and coming back to the state of reality, which is often called Rikpa, which is a word that means seeing, true seeing. That's the Tibetan. And in the Sanskrit, it's Vidya, true seeing. So it's ironic. It's in the beginning, as you learn more and more, you need the teacher less and less. But at the end of the path, at the very highest levels of the path, Guru Yoga becomes one of the most, if not the most, important practices. Because in remembering the Guru and uniting with the Guru, what the Guru means, it's not the individual, this isn't a cult, not cult worship. It's uniting with what the Guru represents, which is that open, rikpa state of mind. This weekend, Chögyam Rinpoche talked about meditation in response to a question. And he said something surprising to me. He said, shamatha, that's the first stage of meditation, is not meditation. Only vipassana is meditation. Shamatha is the act of focusing your mind one-pointedly on an object. It has three main benefits. Well, first of all, let's just talk about how you do that one-pointedly on an object. You might sit and look at a candle flame. You might sit and watch your breath. You might use a mantra, Om, or whatever the mantra might be, any mantra. And you focus your mind one-pointedly. You could do it with a statue. You could do it with anything. You could do it with a stick. And as your mind wanders and you go off into thought, you come back and you bring your mind back to that object of awareness. And focus one-pointedly on it. Come back from thought. Come back from distraction. So the three main benefits of such a practice are, one, that you learn, maybe for the first time, the extent to which you spend your days lost in thought. Most of us hardly realize that even after years of meditation practice, how much we are walking the streets dreaming. Shamatha shows it to you. Because in focusing your mind one-pointedly on an object, suddenly you find, I've been thinking about my enemy, my friend, my mother, whatever, for the last 20 minutes. Well, I haven't been with the object of meditation. Now, these thoughts that one gets lost in, all thought, is full of tension. They're driven by anxiety. All thoughts are about regret for the past, appreciation for the past, hope for the future, fear for the future. They're always about the past and the future, and they're full of tension. So the second benefit of shamatha is that to the extent that you come back to a simple object of awareness and out of thought, you get a rest. You get actually a rest. People feel refreshed after a practice, when they're genuinely practicing shamatha, not sitting there daydreaming the whole period. And then the third benefit of shamatha is that you begin to learn how to focus your mind. By that I mean come back from thought to an object of awareness. Now this, carried to an extreme, become what are called the dhyanas, and they're regarded as being dangerous because they're trance states. You can get stuck in them for a long period of time. They take a lot of work to develop. You're sort of like building a muscle. And they're temporary, like anything else that you build up, because they're not based on discovery. They're based on building this muscle of concentration. On the other hand, you never let go. You never lose the benefits of shamatha. It's incorporated into the next stage of your practice, which is what Chögyam Rinpoche called real meditation, and that's vipassana. And vipassana, another name for vipassana, he said, is rikpa, because it is awareness of this present moment, in this room, now, here, without effort. And the more you can do that, the better your vipassana is, and the more it becomes rikpa. Rikpa is true insight, true seeing. And rikpa reveals the nature of reality and cuts through the errors that have kept us lost in confusion. Those errors are described in a number of different ways, but one of the most powerful and important ones is that we believe in that I exist, true inherent existence, and we believe that not only do I exist, but everything that's other exists as well. That person, that tripod, that camera, that table, all of these things we give true inherent existence, and they're a myth. That true inherent existence never happens. It's a creation. It's an error. And Vipassana, by coming back into this present moment with effortless awareness, begins to reveal that to us. And we begin to live in a world that has no true inherent existence, in which things are real. They're arising and passing away instantaneously in this present moment. That world goes by a number of different names. Emptiness. Emptiness of what? Empty of true inherent existence. Luminosity. That's because as we come back and we see these things stripped of their names, stripped of their identities as they actually are, they appear to us luminously. The sounds, the sights, all of it. But it takes a lot of hard work. Not just hard work in terms of sitting on the cushion. It's hard work because once you've internalized the Guru, as he puts it, meaning this message that we've gotten from the teacher of what the real path is, this path of Rigpa, then all the situations of life, every one of them, becomes grist for that mill. Instead of running from the things that we have regarded as painful, undesirable in our lives, we deal with them head on, whatever it might be. Loss. Loss is a great teacher. Loss of one kind or another. Loss of love, loss of health, loss of youth, loss of money, loss of esteem, loss of friendship. And in the mind of Rigpa, we stop dwelling on the fear of loss and the hope of gain. And instead, we deal with the situations of life in a very direct and practical and meaningful way, dealing with whatever life gives us. And so it involves the acceptance of a certain amount of pain, which we've been running from, perhaps for years. This is truly the hard way, to come to awareness of everything. Nothing is excluded. He says, your spiritual friend might seem more like an enemy, but you need an appendectomy or you will die. Your appendix might burst. Someone says, how hard must I try to open? Must I do it over and over? It's not a one-shot deal, is it? And he says, struggle is irrelevant to opening. In fact, it's not only irrelevant, it's antithetical. He didn't say that, I'm saying that. Because struggle involves ego. Ego's got this idea of what I have to do, and then if I do it, I'm going to get something out of it. And so I'm going to work really hard. That has to be given up. Struggle, he says, flat out here, struggle is ego. Is ego. Isn't that interesting? You see, it is a matter of achieving a victory over struggle. I can't tell you how Chögyam this is, how great perfection that statement is. This is like the end of the path. It's like it's a victory over struggle. Struggle is ego. And that's why when we practice here, when we come back to awareness, it's effortless. We just come back and it's already here. The awareness is here. It's waiting for us. We don't have to create it. In fact, you can't create it. In fact, if you try to create it, that very act of effort gets in the way, clouds it. So when we practice, we say, come back, relax into this open space of awareness. This open space, we are in the middle of the open space of reality. That word space is huge in the teachings, especially the more advanced teachings. The word in Sanskrit is dhatu. In Tibetan is yin. We are in the middle of space, and all of the phenomena that arise and pass away are just modulations of the space, like pixels changing on a computer screen. This gesture moves through the space changes color as the hand goes through it. These sounds come out and change the space. They don't change it, they color it. The space gives rise to them, and then they disappear back into it. Someone says, is it possible to begin to see what is, to see yourself as you are, without a teacher? He says, no. That's pretty flat. Pretty shocking. No. You have to have a spiritual friend in order to surrender and completely open yourself. He talks about working with a therapist. He says if psychotherapy is presented with the emphasis on living in the present moment, working with present problems and not case histories, not just as regards verbal expression and thoughts alone, but in terms of experiencing the actuality of emotions and feelings now, then that would be good psychotherapy. But if you're dealing with a person and you're working with their case history and they're sort of regard themselves as being trapped because they were traumatized in the past in some way, and they regard themselves as damaged and they have to be cured, that's a terrible way to go. He says nowness contains cold case histories and future determinations. Everything is right here now. So I think that's it. It's the hard way because we have habits of hope and fear that can really make us very unhappy as they come to mind, and we feel that we're not going to get what we've been hoping for years, what we've been habituated ourselves to hoping for. We have gotten what we always afraid we were going to get, and now we can't get out of it. Whatever it might be, those kinds of holes that we find ourselves in. And if one dwells on that, that's the way of pain, suffering, samsara, death. But really, so what it amounts to is bringing all of that to awareness, and of bringing our lives to awareness, and of shifting our allegiance. This is what he called it. Well, not in this chapter, but in other places he called it shifting your allegiance. Shifting your allegiance from samsara, which is all hope and fear, good and bad, judgment, and can be so depressing, so frightening, to this world arising in the present, this constant display in which we can be of help to other people. We can be kind. We can be generous. We have that opportunity. And we can also see things as they are, stripped of our own hopes and fears, which are such distortions. Stripped of our judgments, which are such distortions. I think it certainly is a hard way. Has to do with, but it's also a good way, because it has to do with coming out from ego's, under the spell of ego's dominance, escaping the clutches of this watcher who's constantly telling us stories, mean stories, stories about self-aggrandizement, self-protection, self-justification, self-promotion, all kinds of things like that. And the interesting thing is that every time we come present, like when we do this meditation, and we're sitting here, we just come back into the present moment fully, it shuts up. That little voice stops. And one begins to realize with repeated practice, and this is why having a daily practice is so important. With repeated practice, you begin to realize that that I statement is it just comes and goes. And meanwhile, there's this ongoing, open, real awareness of the present moment, where we can live much more openly, intelligently, accurately, and with much more heart than ego allows. Much more heart. We can actually feel the world, commune with the world and the people and other sentient beings who present themselves to us. Ego doesn't have that ability. Ego's nasty. Ego's selfish. Ego's constantly criticizing, hating. That's the kleshas. Trying to aggrandize, trying to possess, self-satisfying, using, attacking. It can be so hard, especially when the world is attacking you over and over, to open to it. Because the attack may keep coming back again and again and again. And the challenge is to keep opening again and again and again. And it can be so painful. And loss. I remember a Mary Oliver poem. She said, "Loss is the great teacher." I always remember that line stuck with me. Talked to my friend in Colorado today, David, and he was talking about how people are just dying around us like crazy. And there's so many people dying, because we're getting to that age. And I always quote Trungpa Rinpoche. He said, when he was still in his 40s, he looked out at us and he said, he was older than me, and he said, "You'll be dropping like flies." And then David quoted him as saying something else that I had never heard. He said, "It'll be really funny." That's a hard one to take. It'll be really funny. Oh my God. But there's so many stories of great teachers dying full of cheer, fearlessly. Well, we could have a Q&A. We could have a discussion. The hard way. Non-heroic. Rochelle.
Well, I heard that Zangzar Khyentse Rinpoche said that Trungpa Rinpoche's students die really well.
What?
Zangzar Khyentse Rinpoche said Trungpa Rinpoche's students die really well.
Die well?
Mm-hmm. They're good at it.
I hope he's right.
Well, I remember when my dad was really sick and it was apparent that he was going to die. I was like, I guess I was 40, I was turning 40 at the time. And I was like starting to remember all those things that Rinpoche would tell us about the charnel ground and about hospitals being like modern day charnel grounds, And all the things he would say that I was like, this doesn't concern me, this isn't about me, I don't really care about this. And then suddenly, there I was in the charnel ground with my father, and I was like, okay, well, let me see if I can remember how he used to talk about how to deal with people that were dying, because he gave really specific instructions about it. And then I started applying those methods to the situation because we were at home. And then he said the greatest thing you could do, and it was all about being in the present moment, all about bringing everything into the present moment. And he say, the greatest thing you could tell a person is, you're dying. So I had to be the one to tell my father, Dad, you're dying.
Did you?
Yes, I did.
Yeah.
I said, remember when, you were younger and your dad died and your mother died, and, people just die, and that's the natural evolution of life. And he was like, well, I'd like to stick around a little longer. I like to see the grandchildren grow up, and all kinds of clinging to the world that he was living in. And I kept bringing it back to the fact that everyone eventually has to go. And I said, well, these little kids now, one day, they're going to have to leave too. Anyway, it really helped him, because as hard as it was for me to have to bring him into the reality of the present moment, I mean, my mother was horrified that I was doing that. She's like, how can you say that to him? But it was such a great gift, because it brought him into the present moment of what was going on in his life, and then he could deal with it. But he wasn't dealing with it alone. He was dealing it with a Vajrayana practitioner whose guru kept talking about death but for 20 years. And finally, I had to work with it myself. And it was so helpful to have received those instructions about relating to the present moment. And we both kind of bonded together at this juncture in our lives, because my father and I were never really friends, and we never got along. And I kept thinking, why me? Why do I have to deal with this now? But I was the only one in the family that was prepared to deal with him, because nobody else wanted to think about anything, just make it seem like nothing was going on. And so that was really good that we could bond that way. And then he died a really good death, and he wasn't afraid. He was totally prepared. And my mom too, she died, she worked with it too. And when he died, she felt, I said to her, oh, well, look how great it is that you kept him at home. And she felt so good about herself, because she said, yes, we treated him like a king. No one could do more than we did. She felt so good about everything was kept in the present moment. And when you're in the present moment, everything works. It's when you leave the present moment, when you fixate about the past or the future, and that's when people get very, very upset and, kind of heartbroken. So, anyway, and that's what we're going through with our friends now.
We're going through what?
With our friends. First our parents, family members, now friends.
Yes, I did the same thing with my parents. Told them they were dying, both of them, at the time. Actually, I didn't get the chance with my mother, and I wound up telling her she was dead after she died. And the same thing with my dad. Told him, you're dead now. Don't worry, everybody's fine. You don't have to worry about us. because you want to allay that kind of a fear. The big enemy in death is fear, and the survivor's job is to allay it for the person who is dying or has died. And so you say, everything is fine, you can relax, we're going to be okay, and now you're going on a new journey, a new adventure, in your life, and we're sending you off with, we love you, and everything's going to be good and okay. You want to give them confidence. And I remember with my father, my mother, learned from my brother and me, to talk to him while he was lying there for 3 days, right? You stay with the body for 3 days. This is the thing. And in Boulder, there was a funeral home that helped us do this, legally. They'd come and pack the body in dry ice, which is not ideal, but these days it's really what you have to do if you want to stay with the body for 3 days, because health authorities won't let you stay with a body that isn't it's going to decay. And so she would go in and talk to my dad, who was lying there, in the bedroom, and then she'd come out and say, well, I've been talking to your father, and my brother would say, it's fine, just as long as he isn't talking back. Although he might have been, if she could hear it, he might have been talking, because the idea is, you see, that the spirit, your consciousness hangs around the body for as much as 3 or 4 days, typically. And after the person has stopped breathing, and the heart has stopped. The common way of judging death, in modern medicine, is not, the Tibetans say that death happens a little bit after that. But that even after that, the spirit stays around the body for a while. And what a ghost is a person who doesn't realize they're dead. And it's very painful for them because they're around the body and they can see their loved ones, but they can't communicate properly, at all with them. And it's very frustrating, and they don't really realize what's going on. So the job of a person to exorcise ghosts is to tell the person, that ghost, you're dead. Move on. There's no point in staying around here. Nothing, you can't communicate with all these people. Trungpa Rinpoche exercised some ghosts in different places. They can hang around for years. But so that's what you do with the person who's died. You let them know they've passed. And I swear, in both cases, after 3 days, it was though a light had gone out in the room. Do you notice that? It was like for the first 3 days, the room felt bright. It felt sort of warm, cheerful. And then suddenly, after about 3 days plus, it was as though the room got cold and dank, and the body seemed like it got turned into clay. It wasn't their body anymore. But maybe it could have been my imagination. I remember kissing my mother just before we cremated her, and it wasn't her. It was clay that I was kissed her cheek. Wait, give her the mic so I can't hear her. The energy. So it's not on.
The energy of the life force is gone.
The energy of the what?
The life force.
It was gone.
Yeah, the energy is gone after 3 days.
Right.
But some people who are kind of very present, they might go into something called samadhi, where the heart center is still warm. And that could go on for a couple of weeks, depending on the person.
Right. These are great teachers often.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and their cremation is delayed.
Mm-hmm. Well, when Rinpoche passed away, we all went up to Halifax because he was at the Shambhala Center there. And he was in samadhi for quite a few days. So we went into the room and practiced with him 24/7 until finally, I don't know, I guess it was over.
So the hard way is always to live one's life in the present moment with openness and lack of egotism, lack of self-protection and self-aggrandizement, and a willingness to be just what one is, which can be very challenging. It can involve a feeling of humiliation, especially as one goes into it in the first time. Oh, it's easy. I mean, it takes a long time, I think, to get over that, at least for me. The ability to be humiliated and feel put down and made less than and be unhappy. It's a sensitivity we've all got. Kind of egotism. So the hard way is really dealing with all of those losses of esteem for other people's esteem, of love, of friendship, all the things that you thought you absolutely needed, wanted your life to be. And when it turns out to be something different, to deal with that. And to be shell-shocked and to go into hibernation, but to still stay present in some way and involved in helping others and be creative. I can't hear you.
Sorry to take the mic, but one of the things I've noticed now that's happening to a lot of people is the relationships they have with their family is disintegrating. And it maybe, I don't know, I think it happens to everyone, whether you're a Dharma practitioner or not. And as much as we try, people and families grow apart. And instead of just accepting that as the present moment, that's what it is, people try to salvage the family situation, and to the point where sometimes it can't even be salvaged anymore. And they don't see the liberation in just letting go of those family ties that bind us, and just going on, as practitioners especially, but all people. And it's because they can't be in the present moment and experience just the quality of life of, as it is, but always trying to replicate what happened in our childhood when we had good relations, allegedly, with our parents and our siblings, but now they're all rejecting me, or things like that. And I just find more and more, everyone I talk to, this is what they're really going through tremendously, of trying to keep the family going. And it just doesn't work. Sometimes, not all the time. So it's very painful.
Lots of sources of pain in our lives.
Just wanted to point out how there's something a little paradoxical about this teaching, because the hard way actually takes less effort in reality than the easy way, because it's actually a small amount of effort to put up your defenses or to make something delusion out of the situation. And just to be open without any sense of a watcher, without any sense of a project or a manipulation, is actually less to do than the habitual thing.
True.
It's hard on ego, but it's actually simpler.
Yeah. But it sure can be hard on ego. Yeah. It's funny, all my life, I always avoided situations of being alone. And now I'm living alone. What an irony, and having to come to grips with that. And it's interesting. Really interesting. I always wondered if it was a weakness on my part, that I constantly sought a companion in life. And I think that this is sort of a hard way for me. This is part of my hard way, coming to grips with something that I really avoided. And I'm sure each one of us has something going in that area, something we've not wanted to have happen in our lives, and then it happens. And we have to deal with that. I think that's what constitutes the hardness of it. But I think you're right. The funny thing is that in dealing with it, it's effortless. It's just that you don't want it. You really don't want it. The loss or the whatever it might be, the condition that comes to you. Lane.
I had a similar thought that my sense is that what Rinpoche meant by the word hard wasn't that the way is difficult, but rather painful and requires a lot of courage.
Thank you. Thank you. Well said. Well said. Well, perhaps we should end. This seems like this has been just a downer. Maybe I ought to tell a joke. Huh? Singing which song?
The Galaxy song.
The Galaxy song? Oh, Eric Idle. What, the last verse of it?
Or maybe always look on the bright side of life would be more appropriate.
That was
All the words.
Always look on the bright side of life. All these guys are hanging on crosses, and they're singing this song. It starts with one, and the camera keeps going wider and wider. You see there's a whole field of these guys who've been crucified, and they're singing, always look on the bright side of life. Do-dum, da-da-da-da-da-dum. I mean, you gotta love that, those people. Monty Python.
Go ahead, say what you want.
No, I'm not going to sing anything. But I recommend to all of you listeners out there, the legions who are watching this video, go to YouTube, watch Monty Python, go ask YouTube to play Monty Python, The Galaxy Song. It's terrific. And there are two versions. You want to see them both. The one with Eric Idle when he was young, and now the one that he's quite a bit older, and he looks older, and he sings this one with Stephen Hawking. And it is worth it. The two of them singing the Galaxy Song puts things in perspective. I'll just give you the last verse. I'll just recite it. He says, the universe itself keeps on expanding and expanding in all of the directions it can whiz. As fast as it can go, the speed of light, 12 million miles a minute, and that's the fastest speed there is. So remember when you're feeling very small and insecure, how amazingly unlikely is your birth. And pray that there's intelligent life somewhere out in space, because there's bugger all down here on Earth. And as he says that, he steps back into the refrigerator from which he entered the room, and the door slams and he's gone. So it's worth listening to. Great creation. And thank you, Eric, and thank you, Carrie, his son, wherever you are. So we should end with a dedication of merit. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound